legislation is driving Scottish landlords to leave the market, why Scottish politicians should support Scottish landlords in the upcoming elections in May, and the unintended consequences of rent control, with our special guest, Chief Executive of the Scottish Association of Landlords, John Blackwood. Thank you so much for joining me today, John. It's really, really great to have you on once again. As I said, we last chatted a year ago, and obviously a lot has happened in the Scottish private rented sector since then. So it's really good to be able to talk to you today more about some of the topics such as the Scottish Housing Bill, getting royal assent. Obviously, we had the Scottish budget earlier in January, and of course, we've got the Scottish elections coming up in May as well. But before we get on to all of that, if you could just please explain to our viewers more a little bit about what SAL does and how it lobbies the government.
Yeah, that's great. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. So I can't believe it's a year since we last spoke, but thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to you as well too. Certainly as far as the Scottish Association of Landlords goes, we are like any other landlord organisation. We're here to represent the interests of our members. And as SAL, the Scottish Association of Landlords, we're the largest representative group for landlords and letting agents in Scotland. We're very proud of that. And we literally represent landlords in every postcode area in Scotland from one corner to the other. With that comes a great responsibility because we say we are the voice of the private rented sector in Scotland, and we very much try and be that voice for all private landlords. Now that comes with its challenges, simply because many of our politicians, not just here in Scotland, but in the rest of the UK, are not that interested in the concerns of landlords. And that's something that we have to obviously overcome in order to get our message across.
That's really great to hear a little bit more about the overview there of the Scottish Association of Landlords, as I know that we've been reporting a lot on this with Sal recently, as I know that you are having a monthly blog with us now.
Yeah,
so thank
that's
you.
new. Yeah.
Thank you so much for posting on our website for your monthly blog more about the Scottish Association of Landlords. And of course, I know I think in one of the articles you did for us, you wrote about the Scottish budget and obviously with the Scottish elections coming up now as well. But before we get on to those, I just wanted to ask, what is Sal's opinion on the Scotland Housing Act now receiving royal assent?
Well, as you know, there's a lot happening here in Scotland, and I feel I would just love to have a period of quiet contemplation for a little while, but it doesn't really happen anymore. Where we are with the Housing Act, it has received royal assent, so it's in place now, is the big thrust for us in the private rented sector was basically the introduction of rent control and what that would mean for the private rented sector in Scotland. I can't say I welcome it, never did, and I feel our biggest concern about it was that we were introducing legislation to fix a problem that we didn't really fully understand, because we don't know what rents are actually being charged here in Scotland. So how do we know how to fix that issue if there is an issue? And I think we're all of the mind that yes, it does need to be tackled, but is blunt legislation the best way to do that? Because surely this is all an issue about supply and demand. We don't have enough properties to rent in Scotland, and therefore that puts pressure on rental prices. So that's our main concern with regards to the Act. I guess what we're pleased about is that the government did listen to us throughout the debate, from stages 1 to stage 3 of the bill, and certainly they took on board that it had to be proportionate, and that any rent controls that would be introduced, if they are introduced, will be devised locally, and that they would be meeting local need and responding to local concerns. So there won't be a blanket approach to rent control. And that's a good thing, and that's something that we certainly welcome. And of course, there will be some exemptions, and we've been championing the cause for exemptions for below market rents, because I think it's perverse that landlords are penalised for not increasing their rents. And we know that many landlords with long-term tenants don't increase the rents. So why should they be penalised for doing so, in the sense that they would potentially never be able to increase their rents? And also in the bill, if a rent control area come in, potentially that rent could be capped at 0% increase, so frozen effectively. And we felt that that was fundamentally unfair, and the government listened to that and changed the bill. So there's various amendments in there that we do welcome, and of course we just have to wait and see what regulation brings, because regulations of course give us the detail of all the legislation there. So there's still a lot to play for in the next couple of years before we see the introduction of any kind of rent control anywhere in Scotland.
Exactly. It's just a waiting game at the moment. And I suppose a lot of landlords are now saying that with all this new legislation coming down the line, is it time to leave the market? Now, we've reported on Property 118 that a lot of landlords in Scotland are exiting the market rather than entering the market. So what does Sal think that the Scottish government should do to to rebuild landlord confidence and to reverse the decline of supply in the private rented sector?
Well, as you can imagine, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I've been, certainly from our feedback from our members, they've been saying for some years now, we are exiting the sector. Some of them have already started to do that, but they've been thinking about it for some time because of the anti-landlord rhetoric, quite frankly, that they're hearing from our politicians. And of course, it's not just that. There's a range of other factors, as you know, that puts additional pressure on private landlords to make them think again about investing in private rented accommodation. So that's a reality now. We now, as you say, have evidence of that happening. One of the issues, though, although we are losing landlords, the number of properties hasn't declined. In fact, if anything, that's increasing. So that begs the question, if landlords are leaving, other people must be buying them up to be able to rent them out, because the rental stock hasn't depleted. That might well happen, given the fact that the majority of landlords in Scotland, of course, only own and manage 1 or 2 properties. So maybe we've just not seen that yet, and that's yet to affect the marketplace. But nevertheless, it is happening. And what we're saying to politicians is that you need to listen to landlords. Landlords have concerns. They are investors. You need to encourage investment. If you frighten off investment, you maybe want to do that, and that's fine, but there's going to be less properties to rent potentially in the future than what we have at the moment. And that's not a good thing. And they do recognise that. And whenever we hear, I was speaking at a conference just yesterday with the Cabinet Secretary for Housing, and she was reiterating we need the private rented sector. We want to work with them. We need to see more investment. They're great words, but we need to see actions that actually speak louder than words.
Exactly. And as I was saying at the beginning, obviously the Scottish elections are coming up in May. So you've been speaking, as you said, at a political conference there. So how do you think that political parties, how can they support landlords?
Yeah, I think they need to recognise that they are an important part in the housing system, and we need them. So landlords need to feel needed as investors. That's important. They need to be understood as investors. All investors are there ultimately to make money. So we're in it as a business. We are business people, and we need to be treated as such. So to ignore us is wrong. To almost make us feel that we're pariahs in society is equally wrong, and does nothing to instill confidence in the rented sector. So they need to change their attitude, quite frankly, towards the private rented sector. Work with us, support us. But I've been calling for a private rented sector strategy. They need to set out a clear, coherent strategy to say, this is the sector we want for Scotland. This is who we want to operate within it. And this is how big it needs to be. Now, all of those things can change and with time, but nevertheless, there needs to be a clear direction. and a commitment to the need for private renting in Scotland.
Exactly. And as you were saying before, actions speak louder than words. So I hope that if any Scottish politicians are watching, that they are listening to John now. And you spoke about a little bit earlier about with the Scottish Housing Bill that you said the Scottish government listened to the Scottish Association of Landlords. And I was wondering, have you met the Scottish Housing Secretary, Mary McAllen? And has she spoke about her support for keeping private landlords in the Scottish private rented sector? What did she say to you?
Yes, and she certainly was very supportive. I think it's fair to say that through the passage of this bill, we've dealt with a number of ministers now, and of course, the shall we say the relationship we have with the Scottish government, thankfully, is much more positive now than it was perhaps at the beginning of the passage of the bill. Mary McAllen has been very clear that she wants to work with us. She's been keen to meet with me. We have had meetings. I sit in the Housing 2040 board, which is a board of representatives from different aspects of the housing sector. So we have regular contact, and I was, as I say, speaking at a conference with her yesterday at a housing conference. So she's very aware as to our views and how we want to work together. And of course, we work very closely with civil servants who are devising the legislation. So for us, as a lobbying and campaigning organisation, it is about having our voice heard. It's about influencing the legislation, which we do, and we do quite successfully. But we all have to accept that landlords don't win votes for politicians. And I think that's an important message we need to get across. They're not going to suddenly think that, oh, well, we need to support landlords hand over fist. They're obviously going to be thinking about the wider community, and they are concerned about tenants and how tenants ultimately can afford to pay their rent and that they have good homes to live in. What I'm trying to say to government and any politician is we want the same things. We want our customers, our tenants, to be happy. We want them to stay in the properties. And of course, we want them to be able to afford to live in the properties. But affordability cuts both ways. Yes, rents have to be affordable for tenants, but they have to be affordable for landlords too, because we're running a business. And if we can't cut our costs or even cover our costs in any way, then of course we're going to think twice about continuing to invest. And you can't blame people for saying it's no longer financially viable to operate this let property, so I'm going to have to sell up. Any business person would do the same. And that's the reality, and we need to get those messages across. But equally, you know, I'm a landlord. I'm proud to be a landlord. I like being a landlord. I'm good at it because I have worked hard to do it. And landlords are working people. It's not a passive income. You have to constantly learn new bits of legislation and keep up with what's happening. And our customers, our tenants, are more demanding now than ever before because they expect value for the money that they're paying. And as customers in different aspects of society do. So tenants are no different.
Exactly. And what you were saying there, landlords are working people and they don't want to get rid of tenants. If they've got a good tenant, a landlord doesn't want to get rid of a good tenant. And obviously, what you were saying there about keeping tenants in homes and obviously tenant legislation, one big thing that's happening in England and also going to happen in Scotland as well is the extension of Awaabs Law to the private rented sector. Now, obviously, this is a huge piece of legislation, and it was just to give some context, was from I think it was poor little Awaab Ishak who died in his social home, and it's about combating damp and mold. Now, obviously, this is a big piece of tenant legislation that a lot of tenant groups have been pushing, and obviously now it's going to be extended to the private rented sector in Scotland. So, what is Sal's opinion on Awaab's law, and how can we make it to make sure that it's balanced for landlords and tenants as well?
Well, our vision as the Scottish Association of Landlords is to ensure that landlords in the private rented sector provide good homes, that actually provide the best homes possible. And that's what we all should be aspiring to do. So we want to have good quality accommodation, which is dry, damp free. That should go without a question, effectively. So any legislation that tries to achieve that, we of course support. The reality is, though, how do we balance out those issues and concerns, which are very real, and let's not detract from the fact that, you know, a young person lost their life, and that's just not acceptable. And we have to all learn the lessons from that. You mentioned that was in the social housing sector, but we equally in the private rented sector have to learn lessons from that, and hence why this legislation has been rolled out across the entire rented sector. So what we need to look at going forward is how practical is this? How is this going to be rolled out? What is Scotland's response to that? And these are the conversations we're having with government. And I think a big thing for us is understanding the underlying causes of dampness and mould, and how do we address that as landlords, as the owner of the property, with repairing responsibilities, but how do we educate our tenants? Because as many landlords will say, it's about the tenants understanding how to live in the property and to make sure that it's free from dampness and mould. So how can we work together, landlords with tenants, to ensure that actually this tragedy never happens again? So what are those lessons? So I think a lot of that's about good, clear guidance as to what the legislation means. And obviously, you know, ultimately, how we live in properties affects the condition of our property. So, but as a landlord, I have to say I'm only recently learning about the causes of dampness and mould, and how actually we can combat that, and what technologies are out there that can help us to do it. But literally, what kind of relationship can we develop with our tenants to ensure they are properly educated, and so are we, and that together we can avoid these horrible situations happening.
Exactly. It's about going hand in hand, isn't it? Working together with the tenant, working together with the landlord, and the education around damp and mold as well. And of course, another thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the energy efficiency standards. Now, here in England, there's going to be EPC C targets by 2030 for private rented homes, and in Scotland, they're going to be doing the EPC C equivalent, which I believe is 2033, and I think 2028 for new tenancies. So, what does the Scottish Association of Landlords think about that? Do you think it's going to further damage confidence in the market? Because obviously, landlords are going to have to upgrade their properties, and that's going to be costly.
Well, to instill that confidence, you need to have surety. You know, you need to be able to tell people exactly what they need to do by when. And one of the biggest issues we have had about the proposed legislation, and let me highlight that we've been talking about this since 2019. That's when we started this conversation, and we were promised legislation which was due to be introduced in March 2020. And of course, we had COVID introduced at that point, and lockdown. So quite understandably, it was shelved. But these conversations go way back to then, and the government has constantly said to us, yes, we are bringing forward legislation, we're going to be consulting on it, we can't give you any timelines at the moment, but it's in the pipeline. And that's been going on for years, and then with the different drafts of legislation and consultations, with moving goalposts constantly. And as you say, it's 2028 for new tenancies, 2033, even that's not set in stone now here in Scotland. So there's a lot of confusion, and landlords are saying to us, I do want to upgrade my property, but I need to know what I need to do and by when. And these are two key questions we cannot answer at the moment. And of course, we're hearing what's happening in England and Wales, and it all gets very confusing, and all these dates merge into each other, and nobody really knows what they want to do. And our concern is, yes, there's a lack of clarity and clear direction, but also there will be a mad rush before legislation comes in for everybody to upgrade their properties probably at the same time. And remember, the best time to do many upgrades is when you have the property empty. And in Scotland, we don't have fixed term tenancies. So you don't know when that tenant's going to leave until they give notice. And they just need to give 1 month's notice at any point, and they're out the property. So it's very difficult then to get tradespeople lined up to do X, Y, and Z, even if you knew what they needed to do. So I think there's going to be a skills issue with a skills shortage. How do you get the right people, the right trades in at the right time? And of course, Scotland's a very diverse country, so there will be extra challenges in rural Scotland as to what there are in our urban towns and cities. So I think there's a lot to unpack with this, and quite rightfully, we're all very concerned, not just about the timing, but the detail of any legislation. The principle is, yes, we all want more energy efficient homes, but how are we going to get from where we are now to where any government wants us to be?
Exactly. It's in practice, how is it actually going to work in practice? And that was very interesting what you said, actually, because I didn't realize that it's been going on since 2019, this legislation. I didn't realize that it's actually been that long.
Yeah, and probably even before then, but certainly, it's been a hot topic, shall we say, since then. So yes, we need to tackle it, but we need to have a clear run-in period of understanding what we need to do, when, and it needs to be a good enough period, long enough for us to be able to do it properly. And these are the messages that we've been trying to get across to government and the conversations I'm having with the Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we've covered a lot there in this interview, John, and I remember asking you this question a year ago, asking about what do you think of the future of the private rented sector. Now, a lot has happened since a year ago, so I would like to ask you that question again. What do you think of the future of the private rented sector?
Well, I do have to check myself from time to time, because I think we're often talking gloom and doom terms, because our life is about fighting legislation. It's about being challenged by this new thought that's coming in, and this new impact on the private renter sector, which never really seems to be positive. So I always feel we're quite negative in our messaging and what we're sending out. But in reality, we need the private rented sector. We will always need the private rented sector. We will always need landlords. The question is to landlords, are you one of these landlords that wants to continue to provide this? There is a business there. What we need to do as landlords, and I'm one of them, we need to be looking at our businesses. We need to make sure that they are sustainable, that they continue to be viable for the future. So yes, I'll be honest, I'm certainly looking at my landlord business differently as to what I did even a year ago, certainly a few years ago. So we have to be more pragmatic, but we're always going to be in need to provide accommodation. There'll never be enough social housing, and not everybody can access home ownership. So where else do they go? Go to the private rented sector. So that's where we come in. And yes, those challenges I don't think will abate anytime soon, but there is that big question that we then have is this something that we still want to be providing? And these are the conversations we're having with our landlord members in order to give them the information and the tools that they need to understand whether this is still the right business for them. But when I speak to colleagues in other industries, whether it's in the property marketing field, if you speak to the Zooplas or others, they say there's a buoyant market out there, yields are growing, rents are increasing. Ironically, with rent control in Scotland, we had the highest percentage of increase in rents in Scotland than any other part of the UK. And we had rent control until April last year in place. So that says something in itself about basically that there potentially can be a viable business there. But landlords are having to look at their portfolios differently and literally crunch the numbers in a different way perhaps than what they did before. So there's a lot of challenges out there, but there is still a business for any landlord who's willing to be in this sector.
I think, as you said there, there's a lot of landlords that are going to be weighing up whether they should even stay in the market or not. But I know we've got Sal working up in Scotland, helping to be the voice of landlords in Scotland. So thank you so much, John, for joining me today for this interview. And you can check out John's monthly blog on the Property 118 website. And also, I know, John, you also have a podcast as well, Sal
We do.
Podcast.
Thanks for the plug. So, Landlord Voice, I'll tell you all things as to what's going on in the Scottish private rented sector. So, please do check that out wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, John. Really great to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you. Speak soon. Take care.